Okay, hi guys. So in this video, we're going to cover the question 2 for the mock paper. Okay, so let's read question 2a together. Explain the possible reasons for why mobile data prices are higher in some countries than others. It's very useful when you read the question to first find out what topic it is. And here we can find out the topic by looking at the endpoint of the question. And you can find the endpoint from the highlighted portion of question 2a. So explain the possible reasons, but explain what? So explain how prices are higher. This is a question that asks you about the price and quantity determination, or rather the price determination. So that's the end point of the question, P and Q, and you would at this juncture already know that P and Q can be explained by two topics, right? The first is demand supply. So is this a demand supply question, or is this a market structure question? And the context of the firm here is that of a price setter. Which is it? Demand supply or market structure? How you tell is by looking at the preamble. So you see what evidence or what data they give you, or what information they give you. So in the preamble here, it says the market is dominated by three biggest players. So what kind of market is this? It's actually an oligopoly. And that's how we know that we are likely to belong to a market structure type of question to determine P and Q. So it is price and quantity determination using a price setter's analysis. Right? One other tip to find the difference between a demand supply or market structure question is that in the A-levels, for the micro portion, there usually will be one of each major topic. So one demand supply, one market structure, one market failure. So if you are confused whether question 2 is a market structure or demand supply question, you can ask yourself whether question 1 or question 3 is demand supply as well. So in this case, if you look at question 1, you would be able to conclude that it is a demand supply question, and so they are unlikely to test demand supply in both questions, and so you can also by elimination conclude it's a market structure question. Okay, so how will you approach a question that asks you to explain price determination for a market structure context? Well, you adopt this framework and this idea. So really the whole idea of price determination is MC equals MR will give you your optimal quantity from the firm's perspective. So this is the quantity that maximizes profit. And at this quantity, they will set prices according to the demand curve. So the process of getting price is actually twofold. First, you find MC equals MR, which will give you the quantity. So that's the first tier, right? First find quantity. Then once you found quantity, the second tier is to look at where the price is from the demand curve. So you trace the QM all the way up to the demand curve, that will give you the price. Okay? So that's always the idea of price determination for a market structure question. Okay, so what you can do in your essay outline, you can first have an introduction and introduce the context of the market, which is oligopoly, and also that will cue to your examiner that you know this is a market structure question. And when you have market structure as MC equals MR being the key concepts, you kind of also have a essay outline, right? Because one reason will be a reason of MR, demand, right? So why is it I say MR and demand as if it's the same thing? It's because every time your demand curve shifts, your MR will also shift, okay? So one reason, the first half of the essay will be coming from a demand perspective or changing your MR. If your MR changes, then very naturally your MC equals MR condition will give you a different Q. And when you have a different Q, very naturally you have a different P, okay? So first is demand side reason, and secondly is cost or MC side reason. Okay, so that will have kind of two halves. Minimally for this 10-mark question, you at least need 2 points, but ideally you should have 3 points. And the third point, you can use the degree of market power as well. Okay. Of course, there are other ways to explain this. If you really wanted to, you can go in to consider collusion. But as a tip for when you see a price determination question for market structure, you should always think of demand side and then the supply side, which is in this case MC. Okay, and just a note here, this term relatively higher cost, you must specify what cost. Okay, is MC. It cannot be any other kind of cost. It cannot be fixed cost. You cannot just say average cost. You cannot just say overall cost or total cost. You can't even say variable cost. You have to say MC change. It is true that the other type of costs may change, but you have to link it to MC changing ultimately. So if you know that variable cost falls, MC will also fall, but you must say that variable cost leads to MC fall. Therefore, MC equals MR condition changes, as in the quantity is a different quantity and the price is a different price, okay? So you must always specify the type of cost and link it to MC. Okay, so that's really the points for this question in terms of the broad essay outline. Then let's take note of the end point in this question. You are supposed to explain how all of these highlighted reasons explains why prices differ. And to unpack price differing, right, actually the idea is perhaps it's obvious to you, but you just have to make it obvious in your writing, because maybe some of you understand this, but it doesn't come across. There are two ideas here. Okay, so first you have to explain how price determination occurs in various countries. So why is it that the demand for one country is higher than the demand for another country? And then how that affects the prices. So you have to compare the prices across different countries. Okay, so maybe this seems fairly obvious to you, and if it is, then that's good, congrats, but please make sure it comes through in your writing as well. And another thing to take note is, please avoid the temptation to compare prices across time. And this is really most often what we see, right? Most questions are asking about how the firm changes price. But implicitly what they're saying changes price across time, right? So in the past, I charged $10, now I charge $15. Why? Okay, here that's not the focus. So it's across countries. That means that you shouldn't write, for example, when you want to write your reason 1 here, you shouldn't say demand increased, because demand increase is increased across time. You should say demand is relatively higher for one country compared to another. That is how you compare across countries. Okay? And that's it for this video. But if you are interested to know a little bit more of the analysis, then let me just cover very quickly. Let me just unpack this point a little bit to give you some tips of how you can draw your graph. So this is to give you a better understanding of what I mean by relatively higher demand. So the graph demand curve that is drawn in pink is country A, and the demand curve that is drawn in black is country B. So country A has a higher demand for mobile data services than country B. And if that's the case, then the price from country A, as you can see from PA, here, PA, is higher than PB. Okay, and that's how you explain in writing. You compare the demand, then you compare the MC equals MR condition, you compare the Q, and then you compare the P. Of course, I didn't write it down all of this analysis down, but I think the visual idea you can see, and that will help you. It'll go quite a long way, right? Okay, there are some tips as well. Here, we see that demand is higher. How do you see that from the graph? It's seen from the demand curve being on the right. So when I say country A has a higher demand than country B, it's because the demand of country A is on the right. You see? It's on the right of country B's demand curve. That's how you see it's higher. But why is it that the demand curve is also steeper? Actually, this is our third point, which is degree of market power. So the degree of market power influences the number of substitutes, and it also influences the PED. right? And the PED, degree of market power, influencing PED is seen from the demand curve being steeper. So these are actually two different ideas. But the takeaway, the tip for the exam is actually you can just show them on both, on one graph. So you don't have to go and draw two graphs. You can just draw one graph, which is the graph I showed you earlier, and you just explain that the demand is on the right because country A has a relatively higher demand. Then later on, when you bring in your point 3 about country A having relatively higher market dominance or market power, then you can also explain that that's why the demand is steeper, but the analysis in terms of where the Q and where the P is the same. So you can refer to the same P and you can refer to the same Q. Okay, so that's one tip. I'm just sharing this with you so to cover content so that when you do something or write something, you're sure of why you say the analysis. Okay, and then for the point about relatively higher costs, or MC, you can just see the green MC for country A is higher than country B. And here the higher, just take note, is shifting up, right? So the way I think about this is the vertical axis is price. So when you are talking about costs, it's along the vertical axis, right? So when I have higher costs, it means shift up in terms of the vertical axis, not so much of the quantity, which is the horizontal axis. So it doesn't make sense to say that MC increase means shift right, because shift right means increase relative to quantity, but that's not what cost is about. Cost is along price or along the vertical axis. So that's how I remember this. MC shifts up. Okay, and then you compare, the same idea applies. You compare MC equals MR to get the different Q, and the different Q will get you the different P. And then you can compare and answer the question. And so this tip here is what I mentioned earlier. You cannot just comment on any type of cost, or worse still, just vaguely just say costs in general, right? You cannot say that. You have to specify the type of costs. And you must make sure that it's MC that changes. Of course, here I write decrease, it may be an increase, it's fine. But how MC changes? And MC may change because there is a change in the variable cost. That's possible. In fact, when variable costs change, MC will change. So the example you give in your essay should be examples of why variable costs may differ, and therefore why MC may differ. Or if an essay requires you or allows you to use the point on EOS, and this may not necessarily be just answering this question. So these tips are true for all market structure questions. If you are allowed to use the point on EOS, then you explain how AC may fall as a result. You can also say correspondingly that MC falls, and then that gets you to your endpoint, right? MC falls, then you can compare MC equals MR condition, gives you the Q gives you the P. Okay, so that's all for question 2A. If you want to know how this is written in prose, please look for the answer key.